Good morning and welcome to Rise and Shine Sundays. I'm so glad that you found your way here this morning to join us for our conversation. Whether or not you're hopped into the room with us at RSS Live or watching this on the Breakthrough Show Network or catching the replay, we're just delighted to have you with us. Every Sunday, we gather around a question. Not necessarily to find an answer per se, because you're not going to be hearing from any experts on a particular topic. But what you are going to be hearing from today are real people who are weighing in on a conversation that matters as we kind of see what emerges from a discussion together around that central question. Last Sunday, we were talking about something called an integrity walk, where that's that moment in which you go from awareness and into action, where if that kind of gap between knowing better and actually doing better and what it takes to do that. Well, as is the wonderful thing that happens on this particular gathering that we do on Sunday mornings, something emerged from the conversation. And we recognize that as we go through this whole idea of taking our own walk for integrity, the word of the week that emerged was the word of was deconditioning. And part of that deconditioning is just recognizing not only how we are conditioned to look at our own walk, but then what happens as we begin to walk along the way in our awareness and doing things, we're going to bump into other people, right? And we're going to find that we may have a different opinion about some of the people that we've been walking alongside, whether or not they may be walking with us, walking for a long time. And then there's this thing that we're kind of conditioned to do when we begin to see the difference between people. We can too frequently act out of something called judgment. And look, this is we're not trying to assign blame or anything along here. We're just asking people to sort of recognize that sometimes when we have an intent to help, that oftentimes that intent to help can kind of come out as judgment. And if we're going to be honest with ourselves, we also have to be able to bring that honesty with others. And I have to say that I'm honestly delighted that in the roundtable with us this morning to have this conversation are disparate voices, literally from around the world. Good morning to my esteemed colleagues as we begin. Good morning to you, Ollie, Ray, Sang, and Claudia. How are you all doing this morning?
Good morning.
Great.
Good morning. Very great.
Yeah.
Very fine.
Good. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that we're going to be able to kind of dive into this because this is the type of question that when you see on the surface, it's like, well, that's not me. That judgmental stuff belongs to someone else. But then, even in answering the question that way, there's a little bit of superiority that kind of comes in on that, right? And as we begin these conversations, we often turn to our anchor, who happens to be in the anchor spot this morning, saying, since you were helped us so well on getting grounded on the integrity walk, do you have some thoughts about this whole idea of when we think we're being helpful and we're going to somehow talk to someone else, we've had all this awareness, we're going to be full of ourselves, and now we're going to go out and interrupt other people in their process and tell it they have to do it our way, right? Help us in this judgmental situation.
Well, I feel like it all goes back to what on the surface level, right? We think it's non-judging, and that's what we're trying not to do. And along with that comes the word empathy, right? Where if you're putting yourself in that other person's shoes, how would you want to be spoken to, so to speak, right? Like if you were, and I think that's the part I know we talked about a few weeks ago, where being helpful and helping someone understand is was the antidote to fear. We talked about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, and I think that's the part where it comes in. So, but I mean, I was having a conversation with my daughter the other day, and she said, we're humans. We're all going to judge people. It depends. We're probably judging them behind closed doors, but it's also how you carry yourself and what you do, and like, what do you mean to yourself? Like what, are you, I mean, everybody makes jokes, right? Everybody's making jokes. So I think it's, again, using your own discernment to understand Right.
And there's the magic, there's the word of the day. There's the word. So help us understand the difference between discernment and judgment. I mean, discernment's one of those $3 words. If you know it for Scrabble or whatever, people say, "Hey, she speaks fancily. What's that word, discernment?" Can you help us understand the difference between discernment and judgment?
So, think about, when's the last time someone walked down the street, right? And you had something to say about what they were wearing or how they were walking, or maybe they're walking too slow in the crosswalk, right? Like, we automatically will label and be angry on the surface, right? With what that looks like. Now, is that something where we're going to go and we're going to roll down the window? Now, some people do that. Don't get it wrong. Some roll down the window and then go belligerent with it. We're not doing that. Like, why would that be something to 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 do in that aspect where you could potentially hurt someone else's feelings, right? And you don't know the stories, and I think that's the other biggest piece, is like understanding that you don't know what's going on in another person's world. So being able to kind of just peel back and go, what does that what would I want for myself if I were in the situation?
So, what you're kind of beginning to talk about is the idea that judgment happens, but discernment is seeing your way through in the response, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
Ollie, you've been away from us for a while. Does anything that we've touched on this morning spark anything with you?
Well, first, thank you for making these sessions of reflection. And I would like also to say that I will not judge you if you are cutting my speech, because I know that I can talk for hours and we are only 5. Thank you also Jamie, Ray, Sang, and Claudia, and everyone who is joining live. Feel free also to ask any questions in the chat or on the replay team. So in fact, I was searching for the roots because I'm a warrior of words. And I was thinking, Judex, someone who declares the law. And then also sentencia, which is opinion, and crimen, charge, accusation. And so I can dive into the words, but before I yield the mic, I was thinking about this incredible metaphor, is that we are all, and it's amazing because it's really right there, we are all in our bubble, a kind of aquarium, and we are all having different water. I enter into your aquarium, I said, it smells really weird, and it's not good or bad. Like I am having the color yellow, you are purple, someone is gray or green, and we are all different, 8.2 plus billion different people, including the dog. And it's really it's to realize that wherever we say, whatever we are, whatever we do, there will always be people that will support us and people who will judge us. So it's a matter of fact that it's past, present, future. Whatever happens in the world, there will always be judgment. But the real question is, what does it reveals within me that is part of me? Because what I judge is something that is triggering me inside. I can develop later, but I'm going to yield the mic right now. Thank you.
Oh, dog alarm
Oh, yeah, apparently there are bunnies running amok
in the front yard.
in the front yard, no less, right? Which gets everyone riled up. And I love that you shared that, Ollie. And then going back to, circling back to, the discernment versus judgment, right? Judgment is, you see it as wrong. You see it as not in alignment, so to speak, right? Versus if I were to roll down the window, right, and yell at someone, is that truly in my character? Is that a representative of who I am? And I think understanding and knowing, if it's like if someone says, oh, Sang would never roll down her window and yell at people outside her window while driving down the highway. Like, she just would not. And so, but you knowing that, right? Because typically if you do something out of alignment with yourself, you typically feel bad about it at some point, right? The guilt kind of trickles in there. But I think being able to as they call it back in the day, read the room, so to speak. And so, so being able to go from there. What about you, Ray? What do you think?
Oh, I like the flow of the discussion because I had two thoughts. My first was we rush to judgment while
Oh,
discernment takes a little bit long. What's going on? Um, so is that a shortcut? Is judgment a shortcut? There was two things I put together in my head is being a film watcher. I'm always intrigued of why did they do the film a certain way. The film Dunkirk. I was reading about the director Nolan, and he said a lot of things are not understood of what actually happened. So he decided to make the film from the three perspectives of the people involved: the people on the beach, the people in the Air Force, and the people on the water, the naval forces. So you see the same event from three perspectives. At first, you see the ships coming, then you see the people on the beach, and then you see the aircraft going over. And it's almost like instant replay. So what's interesting is you go, the people on the beach didn't know what was going on in the air or in the ocean. So back to discernment is to take the time to understand what is the perspective of what's going on, and sort of sharing perspectives is a way to slow it down, just slow judgment down, and then to sort of say, "Ooh, I didn't see it that way." And I think that was the message. So that was an interesting technique, is to not rush to judgment. Use things like discernment. Is if people were offered that opportunity to say, "Hey, did you really look at all the perspectives?"
And if we think about, I think looking at that, what you're talking about too, it's seeing everything as black and white. It's either this or this, right? There's no gray area. There's no different, just different perspectives that come into play. So I love that. Claudia, what about yourself?
Well, I love what all of you have said, but what really piqued my interest was when Ray said, we rush into judgment, and how true that is. We don't. For myself, I learned from a great master. My mother was unconditionally loving, and even if she did have judgment, she kept it to herself. She was always willing to discern and look at different perspectives about a certain situation. I'll tell you a little story. When my daughter, my youngest, was growing up, she was a real fireball. I mean, she was had a lot of things going on. We had a lot of things going on in our life at the time, which took away quite a bit of my attention from her during her most formative years, the teenage years. My mother was dying, and so I was spending a lot of time there. But she was acting out, and my husband was like, "Oh my God, what are we going to do with her? And we have to do something," and blah, blah, blah. And I said, my first thought was, of course, anger at this acting out. But then I thought, well, look at what she's contending with right now. And I acted out at myself as a teenager under different circumstances. And so I said to my husband, I said, we gave her the foundation to be a good person. And she is acting out right now. And look at what we were doing at that age. We were also acting out. So we need to be patient.
Right.
Knowing that in the end, she's going to be fine, because we gave her that fundamental love for people and for herself. And sure enough, she turned into a beautiful person. I mean, the acting out eventually stopped and she turned into a beautiful person. But
Right.
but my point is, I think when we are, and I want to just add this on to what Ray was saying, when for myself, I now, when I feel judgmental, will stop and
Mhm.
at least try to stop and notice that judgment that I'm feeling
Mhm.
and asking, somebody said, what has that touched in me?
Mhm.
And how can I align more with the soul in front of me that I'm feeling judgmental about?
Mhm.
What is it that this person is going through that I am being triggered by? And I find that often stops and the judgment melts. And so that's my technique to try to, yes, there'll always be judgment, but how we react and respond to that, I think, is moving forward how we become a better soul, how we
Right.
allow our soul to become more of us.
Mhm.
I can only imagine what wonderful pearls of wisdom have been spilling out for the period of time. But I will tell you, one of the nice things, I don't mean to interrupt. Was there a train that I'm derailing at the moment?
No, absolutely not.
And I want to make sure I'm going to give a real time sort of assessment of what's happening. There was an incident that happened on our block last night, and so the person who I thought was barking was a rabbit at the door were actually the police. So
Oh.
and so I went. I'm going to just tell you this story because it's happening live. I went over to the door, not thinking that I don't know that they were like people with religious pamphlets, and I said, "Could you please step away? I am." Online live having an important conversation, and they explained to me what they were there for. So I didn't want to come across as judgmental in that situation, right? And
Right.
so I had to be able to sort of trust my process of being able to trust you guys in a live moment to be able to say, they gave me their card. They wanted to get the Ring camera footage off of my phone to see if they could track someone down. So in that moment, I just want to kind of use this as an example. I knew that I was coming across as very judgmental. Like, why the heck are you ringing my door on a Sunday morning and making my dog bark? And why aren't you leaving? Oh, wait, you're the police. And I even, before I yelled at them, I didn't even notice it because they were plainclothes detectives. So part of part of what happens is that you can actually end up being judgmental when your
Wow,
intent was to be helpful. And
this is life.
this is what's like, so this is the application of this on the road, right? So
Mhm.
again, I have to apologize for having to step away live about this, but it's a wonderful example because I called her on the phone when I came back and said I would be coming back, and I said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. This is what had happened." I said, "If you want to come get my Ring cam, you can come and take it away," because I had the choice in that moment to not let that impression stay, and I wanted to be able to do my best effort when you make a mistake, right? As is often what happens, and when we are walking our integrity, I have this dedicated time that I want to set for the conversations for the five of you. Holy smoly, am I going to step away in the middle of it to do something? Oh, wait, it's the police. um,
Welcome to Jamie's Live.
So and before they kind of haul me away, for, being belligerent to them, like I said, I wanted to go back and be the human, right? And I think
Right.
that part of what we get so swept up in being is that we get wrapped up in our own importance, right? And we want everybody to see the world the way we see it. And we want to be helpful, but we want to be able to control what that help looks like. And so we're going to make some mistakes. we're going to,
Yeah.
luckily these people are trained to recognize that there are cranky old men with dogs barking on a Sunday morning. And she kept saying, "You're fine. You're fine. You're really fine. We understand." But I know somebody had put in the chat that was watching earlier that judgment is separation between people, and contrast comparison of condition. Discernment is relationship with people and wholeness of circumstances. Judgment reacts, discernment responds. And I think that that's exactly what I was trying to convey in that moment, right? Which is that I realized that I had done something that was out of alignment with my integrity walk, right? And I will testify that I am probably the least perfect person you will ever meet, right? But just like Lorraine was asking us to consider in the chat this morning, that judgment reacts to the situation, and that discernment responds. And again, we've used that wonderful thing about the pause, right, Ray, so often, and the pause isn't something that you just say, "Well, I'm going to have this centered moment of pause," and then proceed, right? It's sometimes what you have to do right before you're going to smack someone, right?
Ooh.
Correct, right?
Yes.
Is that resonating with
Can I,
anyone?
yeah,
Oh,
can I
yeah.
add some
Go ahead,
something?
Ollie.
Go ahead, Ollie.
Yeah, because we were talking about judgment, and I was also because it's really important also to go to the roots, and so originally it was discernere, discern, to physically sifting materials such as separating grain from shaft, and so it's really too physical, and then with time it becomes separating from the truth to the false, or from the good to the evil. And that's really interesting because I was thinking about two things. I'm going to be short and sweet. First thing, how could we know what is true and what is false? Because it's about also perception. And then how come that we can sometimes have or have not the bandwidth to shift from judgment to discernment? Because sometimes things are
Yeah,
arriving really quickly,
yeah,
and it's not easy because we don't have the bandwidth
right.
to shift from judgment to discernment.
Yeah, sometimes literally the police are at your door.
Yeah.
Ray, what did you want to offer?
Oh, it's interesting as thinking back to are we conditioned to behave in certain ways? And I think last week we touched on we are, whether we recognize it or not, either through parenting, school, culture around us. I attended a conference years ago where even academics are starting to realize, ooh, it's not the way we thought about it. Is in organizational development. I normally would not have gone to that conference, but the fellow basically said, "Hey, we've just written a book. It's a collaboration between several of us." And I went, "Ooh, that's interesting." And then he said, "We want to talk about how we look at organizations and how people interact within organizations." And he said, "For the longest time, everything was diagnostic. What is going on? What is going wrong? Let's fix it." And he said, we started to realize that when you take that singular view, everything is a problem. You have to diagnose the problem. Then he and his colleague and a few others started to say, what's actually really happening? And he said, what's really happening, and you'll love this part, is, oh, it's both. It's diagnostic is when you first notice something, but what you do about it is really dialogic. You have a discussion with others that are involved to determine what it is, as opposed to imposing. Like diagnostic alone would be somebody's, usually a consultant, would make a judgment saying this is what your problem is, as opposed to involving the people and saying, let's talk about that and see what you think is going on. So the multiple perspective. So that dynamic between diagnostic and dialogic is essentially basically using the pause to sort of, I realize do I need to react? Do I need to respond? Or do I need to discern what is going on?
I guess it's until your automatic behavior is in alignment with your value system that you don't need to discern. But from 108 years old perspective, will tell you, I still make that mistake a lot, and Claudia, I don't know if this is true or saying, I don't know if this is true for you either, but oftentimes I can have the best intentions and then all of a sudden, and I'm not going to use the trigger word because I know that everyone doesn't like it, but there can be things that just trigger it that you weren't even aware of, right? That it's like, oh my God, that still upset me. And you can still have, just as you were talking about, we are conditioned to do so many things that we're not aware of. We become aware of our deconditioning process, but in the deconditioning process, we become aware of the things that weren't even thinking about. Like, you mean there's another way to react to that? I thought everybody, went off the handle when the police knocked at their door. So please, we're saying, Claudia, what rings true from any of this?
Well, the conditioning part of it, here's another story I want to tell you. My husband and I owned an art gallery before we retired. For 30 years, we owned this. And at the beginning of that, I had we were in kind of a rural area, but we were in a small town. And so I had a woman walk in the door who had overalls on. She was all muddy. She was, and my first thought, and she had, muddy boots on and everything. And my first thought was, what is she doing here? She can't afford any of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
When she walked out, she was walking out with like $6,000 worth of art. That blew me back. It was like, okay, I was so quick to judge, and I learned a deep and valuable lesson there. And so I gathered our employees and I said, this is what happened. And I want to share it with you because, I made a huge misjudgment, and I want to make sure that none of you do this. I don't think I treated her any differently than anybody else that walked in, but maybe I did, because in my mind, I'm thinking, what is she doing here? Right? Mm-hmm. So maybe I did. But I said to my employees, I don't care what anybody looks like when they walk through that door. Mm-hmm. They walk through that door for a reason, and they need to be treated just as we would want to be treated ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's the lesson I learned, and I wanted to impart it into my employees. And from that day forward, as soon as someone walked in the door and my mind started going to judgment, I went, oh, stop, look at the mistake that you made the last time around with that. And it was because I was conditioned to feel that way, to see someone walk in that was grimy and dirty and didn't appear to belong in that situation. I was conditioned to feel that way. And right. So I forgave myself for that because of the conditioning. But then I also thought, okay, how do I get beyond this conditioning?
And I think you get beyond the conditioning by embracing the discernment, because the discernment is yours. I know that this situation isn't right for me. You're coming at me with all sorts of accusations. You're doing all sorts of other things. Discernment isn't about judging the other person. Discernment says, this is not in alignment with my values, right?
Right.
To go back to the central statement that Sang began our conversation with, right? And so being able to really choose to embrace your discernment, because the discernment is something that you earn through experience, right? Oh, right. That person who dressed really poorly was actually secretly wanting to buy $10,000 worth of my art. So my discernment is to remember, okay, let's be open to things, but if there's new information that comes along, right, I don't have to judge that person. I can adjust it. I can discern. I mean, certainly saying you've had to recalibrate thoughts about, deeply held thoughts about individuals and other people, and it's not coming from a sense of superiority. It's just recognizing, oh wait, I see this differently. I'm going to react accordingly.
Yes. And I think, when you're in your own moment, you have your own aha. This is literally what I had while Claudia was talking and telling her story, because as a person who has constantly been judged since she was little, right? So it started with my face. I had a scar on my face, right? I already have a different facial features than other people that I went to school with. So it was automatic judgment there. And so when I talked about earlier the empathy part, so the best way I feel like now to define discernment and judgment is discernment is seeking to understand why this is happening, why this person is this way, right? What is going on? Whereas the judgment is seeking to condemn, you're right or wrong. I don't allow this. It's not this, it's not that.
Yeah.
And so being, I didn't put pictures of my kids on my desk when I went to work at the government because I wanted no one to know that I was a single mom, because I was automatically going to be judged for that.
Right. And if you are, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you're just, there's a lot of us joining, there's lots of new people joining the chat, and we're talking about this morning, am I conditioned to be judgmental? And Sang has been helping us with a lot of illuminating stories about that journey from judgment to discernment. And like I said, I wanted to make sure that we invited some people to chime in on the chat. So Sang, back to you about that walk.
Yeah, it's just more of really when you're seeking to understand why. And if I look at it from my perspective, all I ever wanted was someone to ask me questions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I just wanted someone to ask. And so I've become that person where I'm asking questions. Like literally yesterday, I'm talking to a friend and I'm asking these hard questions. Like, are you even happy in this relationship? Like, is your, asking those types of questions to be able to do that, because when you're being judged constantly, no matter what, and then having to teach my children, my biracial children, who are already going to be judged too as well, right? How to live in a world where judgment is all around, judgment and blame, right? It typically goes hand in hand. Once we start judging, then we start blaming, like, and it just kind of trickles from there, and it just becomes a habit. And I think one of the things I always think about is when you start sitting back and paying attention to the people around you, and you realize how judgment happens all around you, and it's probably not even a second thought that you're judging that person.
Correct. Ollie, I want to get to you in just a second. I also want to invite the people who may be watching us or in the chat. What are some of the techniques that you've adopted or learned or explored when you do recognize what Sang has talked about, when you're in a field of judgment? How do you conduct yourself? Because that's also very telling, right? Going back to how you treat others. So if you've been in situations where you've been judged, what do you do to sort of get that discernment muscle going? Ollie, what did you have to offer?
First, thank you. Thank you, Sang, for adding something that is really important, asking powerful questions to ourselves or to others. Because when we ask questions, we are not only disrupting our judgment, we are in a curious space, and we are allowing others to correct or to confirm. And that's really important, because else if we are judging, is like closing the door to any discussion. But if we are asking questions, we allow the other part to confirm or to reject. Or because to talk about Claudia's example, maybe this person was being in a situation where she was splashed there are lots of I walk around the road, and there is lots of water, and then a car, and maybe the person was splashed, and lots of mud, and so we don't know until the person is confirming something. And that's what I would like to share. Curiosity to allow the possibilities to open, and not to be in the 0 or 1, the amygdala of judgment.
Right. Lorraine put in a wonderful comment in the chat. Judgment as automatic and discernment as autonomy, which includes one's judgments and being responsible for their clouding to arrive at clarity that reflects alignment. So that statement has a lot of richness in it. But one of the things is that I think the most profound part of it is discernment is autonomy. It's understanding yourself, right? Judgment usually, we can judge ourselves, we can judge others, but there's an action out. Discernment says, I'm going to take responsibility for these assessments that I've made, these labels that I've assigned, these experiences that I've had. And I'm going to do, I'm going to recognize that, whoa, shit, that didn't belong to me. That was put into my place by my mom, or, that woman down the street, or, my school teacher who told me that I didn't have artistic talent, and then you take it back as autonomy, you own it, and being able to say, well, one of the things that I'm sure you guys probably noticed this about me. One of the reasons why I think it's really important for everybody's voices to be heard is that I often would be in the presence of people who didn't want to speak up. And they would come to me because I didn't have that same sort of filter. I happen to come into this world as a cisgendered white dude. I'm going to be able to be given a certain amount of gravitas that isn't extended to everybody else. But if I'm only there to amplify your voices, what can I do to make sure? How can I make sure that I use my discernment to recognize there are going to be people who have really wonderful things to say who don't feel safe in expressing them? So what can I do to make sure I do my best to allow that to happen, right? So, and again, it comes without judgment. And it bothers me a lot sometimes. Well, somebody may turn to me and say, well, that woman really was kind of being bitchy, don't you think? And I was like, well, there's a lot of loaded judgment you just delivered in that sentence before you even got to what she had to say. Because that woman and bitchy are really, some judgments before you've even could you get past listening, to her? Or were those two statements that you held in your head blocking you from that? And it's, again, it goes back to what Sang has been saying, ask questions. Ask questions. Judgment, and again, you can ask judgmental questions, but the purpose of those questions is to seek that information, to release you. Who's got something that's popping up? Go for it.
I will just share my daughter. There's a story that my daughter tells me changed her. And I remember I was carpooling. It was dance mom night, right? I was carpooling, and her and these other girls, they were getting ready for competition, and they were just bitching and whining and talking about this girl who was not attending, and she wasn't there. And these girls are dancing together like 12, 15 hours a week, right? And so I said, guys, has anyone ever been called to see what's going on with her, to make sure she's okay? Is she sick? Is anything going on? And they were just like, no, we didn't do that. Right. I was like, just call. I was like, see what's going on there. So there could be something else going on that you guys know nothing about, and just do that. And so lo and behold, they get out of dance later on that evening, and the little girl's parents were getting a divorce. Right. And she didn't know how she, she was stuck in between the parents and things like that. And so from that moment, my daughter was like, she'll say it sometimes. She goes, that story just we have no idea what other people have going on. And it's such a pivotal moment for me as a parent, that was a moment that I got to teach a lesson that now sticks with her. And then one time when I got to sit in a setting with her and people were describing my daughter, they described that person who saw something that nobody's thinking about anymore. Right. And so that's one of the ways to kind of, when other people, and I think that's a thing to do too, when other people, your friends or colleagues or something are saying something, just offering a different perspective rather than judging them for judging someone else.
Right, right. Well, and again, your story illuminates the famous Stephen Covey quote that Ray put in the chat here at rsslive.org. And that is to be understood, seek to understand. And when you're in the situation where you're recognizing that there's a lot of judgment going on, right? It's okay to ask questions to be able to sort of understand what's going on as well. Judgments, are deeply conditioned, right? And sometimes those questions are best asked of yourself, right? Is this really what I want to be, how I come across? Is there something different that needs to happen here? This is the wonderful thing about questions like this, is that it creates safety around, wow, I really messed up. I really messed up in my judgment. And this is not meant to make you feel shame, blame, feel worse about it. It's wait, okay, having had this awareness, right? Let me seek to understand, right? And did I say something in the meeting that was really offensive, right? Did I noticed that when I made this comment that you did, and I saw this strange reaction on your face. And using I statements, did I say something to trigger? There are a lot of people who see that as weakness. Oh, you should just be, fuck your feelings, just go ahead and say whatever's on your mind, right? But I think that when it is in alignment with your values, right, you want to be able to ask those questions to understand, did I really come, because I think each one of you in this room, and probably some of you watching, I've said that question. I said, did I miss something? Because again, seeking to understand helps reinforce that somatic muscle of discernment. Ray, what you're nodding, so I want to make sure.
Oh, I just love the fact that that all of you brought up saying and Ollie, questions. Questions are invitations to engagement. So you're cutting off the one-way track of judgment by making it a two-way track by asking a question. It's an invitation to give me more information so that I can understand or see another perspective. Or, oh yeah, like your story with the girls going to dance. Like, oh, you mean there's another option? We could find out what's going on rather than saying, well, there again, the judgment, oh, she doesn't show up because she didn't care. Well, no, something else was going on, right?
Right.
And we didn't know that. What you did saying was beautiful, is just to say, well, find out if she's showing up, because either confirm your judgment or destroy it.
Mm-hmm.
Get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. I'm happy to welcome Jessica into the conversation, who I just have to admit, I think this is probably the first time during anything that's gone on the Breakthrough Show Network that the police actually came to the door. So we'll watch the replay and figure out what all that means.
Right.
Claudia, was there something that had been running through your filter?
We were talking about asking the questions and in order to gain a wider perspectives, different perspectives. And I, at one point in my life, was an elected official in our little town. And I noticed that, in all of our meetings, we didn't have anybody coming because everybody was comfortable, right? Why rock the boat? But I also noticed that all the decisions we were making was based on the past. What happened in the past made informed our decisions for the future. And I that's not me. I'm a World Cafe practitioner, and so I talked the rest of our council into doing. We were getting ready to do a 5-year plan for our city, and I talked our council into doing an appreciative inquiry gathering for all of our community. And so we did, and I facilitated it. And from that, many things happened from that. First of all, from that point on, it was like we created vision from that for our community. And from that point on, every question that came up or every decision that had to be made was, what does that vision say? Because we asked the questions of the community, what do you see for this community in 5-10 years down the road?
Mhm.
And what also happened was, and this gets back to something Ray said, what also happened was we got a lot more interaction and a lot more buy-in and a lot more communication back from our community.
Yeah.
Which was wonderful.
Yeah, and one of the things that speaks so powerfully to is another word that is important along those lines, which is allow, ALLOW.
Right.
And when you allow that conversation to be, some people can stay in processing and questions all the time. It's like, oh my God, can we please move past the question? But one of the things that allowance does, and Jessica just posted something in the chat that said she's going to be hosting a room full of people here in a few minutes, and she's going to do her best not to be judgmental and try to fix things. And so that word allow popped in my mind when she made the comment, and same thing with Claudia. You have to be able to set up this tone of allowance for more information to kind of come in.
Right.
You're not paralyzed by staying in the past. You're not going to, you've got a house full of people. You're not just going to let whatever happens. You will allow. There's a giving to the process, right? For the purpose of filtering, what's happening, and we need to make some adjustments based on that idea of allowance. Does that land well with people? That, so if you're going to have a room full of people in 15 minutes and you don't know what's going to be happening, trust your own process and set that tone of allowance to be able to see what's happening and recalibrate in the moment. Yeah, Ollie, you have your hand up.
Yes, I would like first to thank you, Jamie, for the space each Sunday, and also Ray, Sang, and Claudia, and also myself, including myself. And also thank Jessica and Teresa and Stacy for being part of an amazing network. So also really a blessing. And what I would like to say is that we can talk for hours, and we have the soul the soul in few minutes. But the most difficult also is to judge ourselves, because what I would like to convey before we are shifting gears is that we should also give ourselves grace, because we are human beings, we are imperfect. And there is a quote from Maya Angelou that says, I am a human being, nothing human can be alien to me. So at any time you have different polarities force that are always battling to drive us. And it's what are our thoughts? Are we using our thoughts and our speech to be constructive or to be destructive?
Right.
And so that's why it's a powerful questions. Appreciative inquiry is really important, and to also give ourselves grace, because there is no time where we will say, oh, we are perfect, we are, because as long as we are breathing, we
Right.
are going to be judgmental. But it's about to really catch our judgment and
Yeah.
to allow the space and the time
Correct.
to
And I think Ollie,
find another solution. Yeah.
and I think what happens, Ollie, is that grace happens, but allowance is what allows grace to happen. And so it's like sometimes, what is it that someone in the scientific community will tell me, that there's one little chemical that does something that creates this other thing over here that gets all the credit for it, right? Grace gets all the credit for everything. But the thing that actually triggers that, right, is allowance. It's that, oh, okay, I'm going to set up that attitude, that moment to allow what needs to unfold. Um, Anyone else? Right, we're coming up at the end of the hour, and thank you for pointing out the fact that at the top of the hour on the Breakthrough Show Network this week is the final Spirit sessions, right? And so when you've held a space for a long period of time where people have been able to have a conversation, it's that allowance. It's a recognition that whenever you bring people together, you have your values. You're going to bump into things, just like Jaloki was talking to us last week. The tendency of the fix-it culture, right, also puts us in this superiority. Well, saying, I know exactly how to take care of that problem that you have. And even though you might have the right answer, right, there's a way of delivering that information that doesn't come across as judgment. It's by asking questions, saying, would you like an interesting, is there something that I can help with in that perspective, right? Never answer an unasked question, folks. If you're offering something, there can be nonverbal cues, but it's so important for you to recognize that when you do see someone who that may be doing things different, it's okay to ask them questions, right? Saying, it's you, and that sets up that whole allowance cycle and the potential for so much of a difference, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So as we reach the end of this hour, please, can we recap? We've come up with a lot of things as we've been talking about. We recognize that the judgment exists whether or not we want it to admit it. So and recognizing that it comes from a conditioning and the way in which you have the awareness, right? And oftentimes it's right before you open your mouth, or even after you've opened your mouth when the police come to your door. And that, I mean, look, what the way in which the universe would provide us with a real-time example of this, but you have that opportunity to really recalibrate, right? To come back and change it by acting in a different manner, right? Ray, anyone rounding up for the hour?
I have a police story to add to your police story.
No.
This will be our question for next week.
It's the conditioned judgment. We had heard a lot locally about defunding the police.
Uh-huh.
So an incident happened in the neighborhood that we were aware of. Somebody's car had gotten stolen. So the two police officers are knocking on the doors. And I'm going, okay, fine. The usual thing. Did you see anything or whatever? The way they approached my wife and I was amazing. They said, hello, your neighbor down the street has had their vehicle stolen. Could you help?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm going, what? And they said, do you have any do you have any camera footage? Or if you know anybody down the street, could you ask them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I went like, wow, that's the first time I had a conversation. They had a conversation.
Yeah.
And guess what? What did we notice? They asked questions.
Mm-hmm.
Could you help?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then that was an invitation for me to not just, hey, the police. So I think that there again is most situations by asking a question changes as I think you said it, saying changes, and Claudia, it changes the dynamic of the interaction by connecting people.
So questions keep you out of solidifying your judgment and allow that discernment to appear. So Jessica put in the chat, of course, does that mean that every time that I ask her a question from this day forward that I was really trying to judge her and I'm just asking her? and I'm here to say, no, that's right.
No judgment.
No judgment. But one of the things that's so funny about that is something Ray and I have talked about before. A lot of people who get really judgy ask questions, and they ask them in judgy ways because they're not really interested in what you have to say. And I think that that's the other part of it. Are you stupid? All of those judgmental questions, because, you can think, oh, well, I saw this discussion where they said, I just need to ask questions and stay out of my judgment. No. the idea that you're asking the question is because you are genuinely interested in what the person has to say in response. Claudia, has that been true for you?
Oh, most definitely. I can think of several instances where I've caught myself in time before I said something very judgmental, and did ask a question instead. And basically what happens, it changes the whole perspective of what I was thinking. And it made me go deeper into myself, saying, okay, this is who I really am, not this judgmental person. So asking the question, asking the questions, and I've had, and conversely, I've had that happen also to me, where I feel like I'm going to be judged, and then all of a sudden the person I'm speaking with asks me this really great question, and I think, okay, well, that dispelled my feeling of being judged. So.
Well, no, thank you for that, Claudia. And thank you all for these really interesting perspectives during this episode of Police Academy. But in reclaiming the time here for a minute, saying, is there an assignment that you can give us for this week? You're very good at making sure we have homework.
It's never an assignment. It's always an invitation.
An invitation. What would you like to invite us to?
My invitation this week is to observe, right? It's always going to be observe first. Observe and pay attention to what other people are saying around you. How often do you hear them judge something or that you feel is judgmental, right? Because they may not think of it as judgmental. So there's also that perspective. And then also think of times when you're just in general conversation being judged. I was at breakfast recently and I talked about how I didn't particularly like syrup on my French toast, right? Well, the person across from me was like, ew, why not? And I was like, it's just not my preference. I'd rather dip it in this. And it was like, well, that's disgusting. Right. And I said, well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. And literally it's just changing the conversation to just say, you know what, thank you very much for saying that. I'm gonna eat it anyway, right?
That's right.
And because oftentimes it's just those little things, right? But sometimes those little things, if we're not in the right state of mind, we're mad about something else. Right? And that little trigger, that one little snippet there, somebody says something about the syrup, and next thing you know, I'm talking about why the bills haven't been paid in 12,000 years. Right? You know? So really thinking about and observing the conversations around you of people who automatically judge, probably without realizing it. But also how often you're quickly judged by things. And then focus on yourself.
Right. So take that pulse, be willing to incorporate that data in. Was there something you wanted to say in the final minutes?
Yes. When you ask question, always or be wise in the question you ask, because if you are saying, are you crazy? It's not really the perfect question that you might ask, but also allowing time and being in listening mode is really important. Because we are not processing questions at the same time. Some probably needs 20, 30 seconds. And shorting question over question is not really conducive. So
Gotcha.
that's my advice. Thank you.
All right. So it's time for us to step away because there's a very special moment coming up, the final episode of Spirit Sessions on the Breakthrough Show Network. Thank you all for being here. We invite you back next week. We're grateful to have you with us. And as always, let's wake up to what's emerging. We'll see you.